Alexander Clackson joins me now from London. He's a researcher at the University of Lancaster and an advisor to governments in former Soviet republics. Alexander, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, what would it take to get a ceasefire in Ukraine? What would it take to get to a second round of talks? And who would be an appropriate mediator?
Well, the two sides are so far apart at the moment, it's difficult to see how they will be able to achieve a ceasefire in the foreseeable future. For Russia, they've always been clear that the conditions for them include a militarily neutral Ukraine, no NATO in Ukraine, as well as potentially agreeing that Crimea is officially part of Russia. Now, these are some of the conditions which Ukraine is just not going to agree to, especially the last one regarding Crimea. So at the moment, it's difficult to see what they will be able to agree upon. At the same time, it's good that there are at least some kind of negotiations going on. Perhaps they will be able to at least agree to perhaps some kind of ceasefires in specific regions where hostilities are increasing. That would be a positive. Now, in terms of who could be a mediator, I can understand Ukraine's position in this regard. Belarus has obviously been on the side of Russia. In this conflict, one of the countries that voted with Russia at the UN General Assembly. So at this stage, you can't say really that they are a let's say neutral mediator. Nevertheless, it's really at the moment the only option. It's the only place where Russia wants to have negotiations. So there's really not much choice.
Well, a few weeks ago, you wrote, keeping Ukraine neutral and out of NATO would benefit all sides. Do you think that is even still possible after this war that is happening right now?
I just believe that it's the only option that will end this conflict because Vladimir Putin has made it clear that it's just a non-starter for him. These sanctions have played no impact whatsoever in terms of slowing down the conflict. In fact, I would argue that the conflict has actually increased, and the military activity has actually increased as well over the past few days. So the sanctions have played no part whatsoever, which means that Putin believes that the issue of Ukraine for him and for Russia is an existential issue. And he's made it clear many times now that unless Ukraine chooses neutrality, he's just not going to drop this point. And for that reason, I think that Ukraine should consider this option. We've got the example of Finland, which is a militarily neutral country, despite being on the border with Russia. Now, Russia has never obviously attacked Finland and has never voiced any kind of aggressive rhetoric towards Finland. So there is precedent for it, and I think for Ukraine it would be a better option because it would enable them to essentially just get on with building their economy and building closer ties with the EU economically without the military part.
Well, and now it seems that NATO seems stronger and more unified than ever. So that being said, and what you just gave us, is there an off-ramp for either Ukraine or Russia?
Well, as you say, NATO is indeed quite united at the moment, and it doesn't seem like the Western countries are at the moment willing to pursue the policy of neutrality for Ukraine. At the same time, you've mentioned in your report the humanitarian crisis which is taking place at the moment in Ukraine. So I think as this war goes on, we may hear more voices from both the Ukrainian side and the European side as well for Russia and Ukraine to negotiate and to come to some sort of an agreement. And I do believe that there's just no other option that for Ukraine to agree to at least not have certain military equipment on its territory. I think that at least could be a starting point for both Russia and Ukraine to consider. And as negotiations go on, then perhaps the neutrality question could be raised as well.
All right, we'll just have to wait and see what happens in the coming days. Alexander Clackson, thank you so much for joining us from London.
Thank you.